General Hospital will reveal. Valentine moved cautiously through the darkness, each step calculated, but no movement could escape Sonny's ever-watchful eyes. The moment he was caught, the weight of betrayal hung heavy between them. Valentine knew there was no easy way out. Sonny was not a man who forgave easily, and with a gun pointed directly at him, Valentine could feel the thin thread holding his life together beginning to unravel. The tension in the room was suffocating, the silence stretching unbearably as he struggled to find the right words to explain himself. But there was no excuse, no justification that would satisfy Sonny. His only option was to tell the truth, the whole truth, regardless of the consequences. His breath was unsteady as he admitted the grave danger looming over him. He was being hunted, relentlessly pursued by those who would not rest until he was dead. But his desperation was not enough to move Sonny. The truth had to cut deeper. He had to reveal the secret he had kept hidden for so long, the very secret that had the power to shift the balance of power entirely. As the words left his mouth, the atmosphere in the room darkened. The revelation that Drew had been behind the explosion that left Micheal seriously injured was not just a betrayal, it was an act of war. But Drew had not acted alone. He had been manipulated, pushed toward the brink by Sidwell and Brennan, men who thrived in the shadows, orchestrating chaos for their own gain. The weight of his confession settled heavily between them, but Sonny remained eerily still. There was no visible reaction, no immediate sign of what he was thinking. Valentine knew that silence could be more dangerous than rage. It meant Sonny was processing, calculating, deciding whether or not Valentine deserved to leave this room alive. The longer the silence stretched, the more Valentine felt the cold grip of fear tightening around him. He had risked everything by coming here, hoping for a slim chance at survival, but there was no guarantee Sonny would grant him that mercy. The truth was a dangerous weapon, and Valentine had just handed Sonny a loaded gun. Sidwell and Brennan were not just after him, they wanted complete control. They had orchestrated attacks not just to wound Sonny but to dismantle everything he had built piece by piece. Drew had been an easy pawn, manipulated by his own desperation to reclaim a life he had lost. He had believed that by eliminating Sonny, he would secure a future with Willow, free from the chaos that had consumed his past. But Drew was blind to the truth, he was never meant to win. The moment his usefulness ended, he would be discarded like all the others before him. The weight of this conspiracy was staggering. It was not just about revenge but about power, control, and the complete erasure of Sonny's influence. Valentine understood that if Sonny wanted to stop them, he could not do it alone. And yet, trust was a luxury neither of them could afford. There was no telling whether Sonny would see him as an asset or a liability, whether he would choose to use the information Valentine provided or eliminate the man who had brought it to him. The gun in Sonny's hand remained steady, a silent reminder that this moment was not yet decided. Valentine could feel the sweat forming at his temples, every muscle in his body tense with the anticipation of what would come next. His life now rested in Sonny's hands, and there was nothing left to do but wait. The decision would be made soon, one that would determine whether he walked out of this room alive or if this would be the final moment in a long and treacherous game. The seconds stretched into eternity before Sonny finally moved, lowering the gun slightly but not fully. It was not a gesture of trust, but of calculation. Valentine understood, his life was no longer his own. He had entered a game far more dangerous than he had anticipated, and there was no turning back now. Whatever came next, survival would depend on his every move. Sonny stood frozen, the weight of the revelation crashing down on him like a tidal wave. The truth, raw and unrelenting, pieced together fragments of a puzzle he hadn't even realized was incomplete. For weeks, he had sensed something was wrong, whispers in the shadows, betrayals hidden beneath false loyalties, but now, everything was laid bare before him. The rage inside him flared like an uncontained wildfire, scorching through his veins, but he refused to let it consume him. He had learned long ago that anger was a weapon best wielded with patience, not impulse. His fingers tightened around the grip of his gun, but he did not pull the trigger. Killing Valentine would be satisfying in the moment, but ultimately, it would be short-sighted. A bullet to the head would end Valentine's story, but keeping him alive? That would make him useful. Sonny's mind worked quickly, calculating every possible move, every advantage that keeping Valentine under his control could bring. If Valentine had survived being hunted, it meant he had knowledge, connections, and more importantly, fear. Fear was leverage. Fear could be molded into something valuable. His silence was more unsettling than any outburst. He took a slow step forward, studying Valentine, who stood rigid, his breath uneven but his eyes locked onto Sonny's every movement. Valentine wasn't a fool, he knew he had just gambled with his life, and he was waiting to see whether he had won or lost. Sonny let the moment stretch, let the tension coil tight enough to make Valentine question his own survival. Then, finally, he lowered the gun, just slightly, a calculated movement meant to establish dominance rather than mercy. Valentine exhaled softly, but Sonny could see that he was still on edge, waiting for a final verdict. Sonny didn't offer him reassurance, only the cold calculation of a man who had already decided how to play this to his advantage. If Valentine was right, if Sidwell and Brennan had been orchestrating everything from the shadows, using Drew as a pawn, then Sonny was at war with enemies who thought they could manipulate him like a piece on a chessboard. But Sonny wasn't a pawn. He was the one who ended games. His mind sharpened with the possibilities. Keeping Valentine alive meant having an insider, someone desperate enough to cooperate, someone who had already betrayed once and could do it again. And with the information now in his hands, Sonny had the power to strike back, not with brute force, not with reckless fury, but with precision. Sidwell and Brennan thought they had control. Drew thought he had eliminated a threat. But none of them realized the real danger had only just begun. The plan began to form, layer by layer, meticulous and ruthless. He wouldn't simply retaliate, he would dismantle them from the inside out. He would make Drew regret ever believing he could rise above him. He would expose Sidwell and Brennan for the cowards they were, turning their own schemes against them. And when the time came, when every last one of them had played their role in their own downfall, he would destroy them in a way that left nothing behind. Sonny's gaze flickered back to Valentine, who was still standing cautiously, unsure whether he had truly escaped death or had just been bound to an even darker fate. Sonny smirked slightly, a cruel, knowing expression. Valentine had given him exactly what he needed, and for that, he would be spared, for now. But Sonny would never forget the betrayal, nor would he forgive. Valentine wasn't an ally, he was a tool, a means to an end. And when Sonny had no more use for him, there would be no hesitation. The room felt colder now, the weight of an unspoken agreement hanging heavy between them. Sonny had made his decision. Valentine would live. But he would never be free. Valentine, though still haunted by the lingering shadow of fear, knew he had narrowly escaped death. But survival came at a steep price. The moment Sonny lowered his gun, Valentine ceased to be his own man. From that point on, he was bound to a new fate, one dictated entirely by Sonny's control. There would be no freedom, no second chances. Sonny had made his choice, and Valentine was now a pawn in a much larger game. And like any pawn, he would be sacrificed without hesitation the moment he was no longer useful. The weight of this realization settled heavily in Valentine's chest as he forced himself to maintain composure. He had survived the night, but the battle was far from over. Sonny would use him, manipulate him, and exploit every ounce of knowledge he possessed until there was nothing left. And yet, even as he acknowledged this cruel truth, he knew there was something far worse waiting in the shadows. Brennan. The mastermind behind the conspiracy, the man who had orchestrated every move from the darkness, was not one to let secrets escape. He was meticulous, ruthless, and above all, unforgiving. The moment Valentine opened his mouth to Sonny, his fate had been sealed. Brennan would never allow him to live now. Not after what he had revealed. A new hunt had begun. This time, Valentine was not just fleeing the remnants of his old enemies, he was running from an entirely new predator, one far more dangerous than the ones before. Brennan did not tolerate loose ends, and Valentine had just become the biggest liability in his entire operation. There would be no warnings, no negotiations. Brennan's methods were swift, clean, and absolute. He had eyes everywhere, ears in places Valentine could not even begin to anticipate. His influence stretched far beyond simple assassins and hitmen. He controlled systems, institutions, entire networks designed to ensure he always remained several steps ahead. And now, those very resources were being turned against Valentine. Every move he made, every breath he took, was now a gamble. One wrong step, one moment of hesitation, and he would be erased without a trace. The game had shifted. Sonny was playing one side, Brennan was playing the other, and Valentine was caught in between, a man running out of places to hide. His only advantage was that, for now, both sides needed him alive, Sonny to use him as leverage, and Brennan to ensure he was silenced. But that balance would not last forever. At some point, one of them would decide that Valentine's existence was no longer beneficial. And when that moment came, he would have to be ready. The chase had only just begun, and Valentine knew one thing for certain: he was no longer just running for survival. He was running against time, against fate, against the inevitable reckoning that would eventually catch up to him. Sonny, his fury smoldering beneath the surface, began meticulously crafting every step of his plan for revenge. He was not a man to act rashly, every move had to be precise, every retaliation calculated. Drew would not escape. Sidwell and Brennan, the masterminds lurking in the shadows, would soon be dragged into the light and forced to face the consequences of their betrayal. Sonny had spent years building his empire, securing his position, ensuring that no one could challenge him without suffering the ultimate price. Now, with the truth laid bare, he was ready to strike back with the kind of ruthlessness that had made him a legend in the underworld. But even as he moved his pieces into place, setting his trap for those who had dared to cross him, an unseen threat was taking shape right under his nose. Valentine, though seemingly cowed into submission, was far from broken. He had been spared tonight, but he knew his survival depended on more than just Sonny's temporary leniency. He had seen men like Sonny before, powerful, unforgiving, and always in control. As long as Sonny dictated the terms, Valentine's life was hanging by a thread, waiting for the moment he was deemed expendable. He could not afford to remain a pawn in Sonny's game. If he wanted to live, he had to create his own exit strategy, one that would ensure he walked away from this war unscathed. In the cover of darkness, Valentine began laying the groundwork for his own escape. He would have to move carefully, subtly. Sonny was no fool, and the moment he sensed deception, there would be no second chances. But Valentine had learned to adapt, to manipulate, to survive in the face of impossible odds. If he played this right, he could slip through the cracks of Sonny's control and disappear before the inevitable storm broke. However, he was not just running from Sonny. Brennan's reach was vast, and now that Valentine had spoken, his life was worth less than nothing to the man who operated in absolute silence. He was being hunted from both sides, and every choice he made carried the weight of deadly consequences. Yet, even as Sonny plotted and Valentine schemed, there was another force at play, one that neither had fully accounted for. Drew. His betrayal had been exposed, his part in the bombing laid bare, but something about the ease with which his name had come to light troubled Sonny. He had spent too long in this world to believe in simple answers, and the more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. Had Drew truly been the mastermind of his own rebellion, or was he merely another pawn in an even greater game? Sonny had seen it before, men who thought they were calling the shots, only to realize they had been playing someone else's game all along. And if that was the case, then who was the real enemy lurking behind the curtain? The deeper he delved, the more questions arose. Drew's motivations were personal, driven by resentment and misguided ambition, but what if his betrayal extended beyond what had already been uncovered? What if there was another card he had yet to play? Sonny could not afford to underestimate him, not now. Not when the war had only just begun. As the city settled into uneasy silence, the pieces continued to shift on the board. Sonny had his plan. Valentine had his own. And Drew, somewhere in the shadows, was still holding a secret that had yet to be revealed. A secret that could change everything. The storm of vengeance was gathering momentum, an unstoppable force poised to consume everything in its path. Those who had played their part in deception and betrayal would soon find themselves caught in a maelstrom from which there was no escape. Sonny had been wronged, and for that, there would be no mercy. Every action, every decision was leading to an inevitable reckoning, and when the moment came, no one would remain unscathed. The carefully constructed facades of power and loyalty would crumble, revealing the raw, unfiltered truths that had been hidden in the shadows for far too long. New secrets were on the verge of being exposed, revelations that had the power to shift alliances and fracture even the strongest of bonds. No one was safe. Friendships, loyalties, and even blood ties would be tested under the weight of Sonny's wrath. The cost of betrayal would be steep, and those who had dared to defy him would soon understand the magnitude of their mistake. There would be no room for hesitation, no second chances. The world Sonny ruled was built on control, and those who had tried to undermine him would pay for their insolence with blood. Valentine, who had barely escaped with his life, had no illusions about his position in this deadly game. He was not free, far from it. He remained trapped in the intricate web of power plays and vendettas, a pawn in a battle that had long since spiraled beyond his control. He had thought, for a fleeting moment, that survival meant freedom, but he now understood the cruel irony of his predicament. The deeper he was pulled into Sonny's war, the more he realized there was no easy way out. He was marked, his fate tied to the ruthless forces that surrounded him. Whether as an asset or a liability, he would remain in play until the very end. But Sonny was not the only hunter in this game. Brennan, a master of manipulation and secrecy, had already set his own pieces into motion. Valentine had spoken, and for that, he had become a loose end that needed to be severed. The execution was inevitable, the only question was when. Brennan did not act out of anger, he acted out of necessity, out of a chilling, calculated efficiency that left no room for error. His reach was extensive, his methods merciless. He did not tolerate risks, and Valentine had just become one. As the storm continued to build, the lines between predator and prey blurred. The battlefield was no longer defined by clear enemies and allies, only by those who could adapt and those who would fall. Drew, despite having been unmasked as a traitor, still held power in ways that Sonny had yet to fully grasp. His betrayal had been exposed, but had it truly been his only hand to play? Or was there yet another layer to the deception, a move Sonny had not anticipated? The city, its undercurrents of violence and retribution tightening with each passing hour, was on the brink of chaos. No one would be spared the fallout, not even those who believed they could stay in the shadows. When Sonny struck, his enemies would feel the full force of his fury. Sidwell and Brennan had orchestrated this war, but they had underestimated the man they sought to destroy. Drew had turned against his former allies, but he had yet to understand the depth of Sonny's vengeance. And Valentine, caught in the middle of forces far greater than himself, was running out of options. The storm was no longer coming, it was here. And when it hit, there would be no escape.